All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. Today we're continuing analyzing the platform of Andrew Yang, and today we have actually decided to jump into the analysis of a sticking point that many conservatives are having with him, despite a lot of conservatives being okay with the freedom dividend, UBI, and the vast majority of his platform. There's one big hump, one big bottleneck that all of them get stuck in, and that is the Second Amendment. They seem to agree with everything except for his approach to guns and gun safety. And I think the fact, honestly, that he's a Democrat approaching this from the left. So, Cody, hit me. What's Andrew Yang say on gun control?
Well, once again, I always like to go through when it comes to Andrew Yang and his own personal platforms on his website, just to go through and read what is it in his own words he says he's going to do. What he says is, as president, I'm going to promote a stringent tiered licensing system for gun ownership. Think a CDL versus a regular driver's license.
Okay.
So all tiers are going to require you pass a federal background check and eliminate the gun show loophole, which we can talk about that in a whole other video, the gun show loophole.
Yeah.
Tier 1, basic hunting rifles and handguns. Again, what is a basic hunting rifle and what's a handgun? Pass a background check, pass a basic hunting firearm safety class, and provide a receipt for an appropriately sized gun locker or trigger lock per registered gun.
Okay, I'm good with this so far.
Tier 2, semi-automatic rifles, which I don't, whatever. Have a Tier 1 license for at least 1 year, be at least 21 years of age, and pass an advanced firearm safety class. I'm pretty sure the Second Amendment already says you can't do this. Tier 3, advanced and automatic weaponry. You have to maintain current restrictions and definitions of the National Firearms Act of 1934. You're going to ban high-capacity magazines. A federal judge just ruled you can't do that. Require submission of fingerprints and DNA to the FBI. Submit to a gun locker inspection to ensure it can house the weapons, and undergo yearly refresher trainings on the use of these firearms. Anyone with a history of violence, domestic abuse, or violent mental illness would be restricted to receiving a license, and those who currently own any firearms will be grandfathered in with their current license, and for the 1 year requirement, if they decide to apply for a Tier 2, receive a one-time good owner tax credit for adhering to the additional requirements implemented by the new system, be allowed a tax write-off for the purchase of any equipment required to adhere to the new standards, and be allowed to register any currently registered firearm without facing any penalties. And that's just half of it, man.
Okay.
Tough, isn't it? Some of the stuff's really, really tough to deal with.
It's sometimes I don't know if he just doesn't know that much about guns.
I'm almost assuming, because like some of the stuff is like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I'm not even a massive enthusiast. I'm a gun owner. I got a membership to the local gun club, and I go on occasion as an enthusiast, and also just to make sure if I ever have to use it to protect myself against a thief or my own government, that, you know, I'm shooting straight. You know, okay, so I'm not even one of those crazy gun freaks that are on the range every day. But let's start from the top. Promote a stringent tiered licensing system for gun ownership. I'm actually kind of okay with that. I believe owning shotguns and long rifles, Boy Scouts, if they have merit badges for this stuff, it's not rocket science. I'm okay with that.
But it's a little tricky when you think about, because it's not, these aren't elephants and giraffes. Like, what is a handgun in relation to a submachine gun, to a machine pistol? You see what I mean? Like, where do you draw lines on this?
Now, pass the federal background check. Fine. All of us agree with that. And eliminating the gun show loophole, that's just a dog whistle to leftists. Tier 1, basic hunting rifles and handguns. Once again, well, what's a handgun? You can have an AR-15 pistol, and it's still an AR-15, but since you hold it away from your chest instead of on your chest, it now counts as a handgun instead of an assault rifle, is just foolish. And also, I've never liked the 21 years of age thing, because we've experienced this problem that we can have Iraq war veterans that join the military at 17, completing their terms of service by the time they're 20. They're allowed to use an AR-15 to shoot ISIS in Syria and Lebanon, but they can't come home and own a hunting rifle because they're not 21 yet, and pass an advanced firearm safety class. Well, my only problem with this advanced firearm safety class is I wouldn't want it to be government regulated. I'm okay with scuba diving licenses administered by private third-party organizations having their own stringent and strict regulations, offering their licenses as well. But I wouldn't want a government-regulated class, because the government could then just do what they do with handgun permits. They could make it so difficult to pass all of the requirements to get your license and pass the class, then nobody can get it. It's like here in LA County. I think they give out only like 3 to 4 concealed carry permits.
And they can do tricky things. I mean, I don't want to get too absolute on this, but there's been, accounts of them doing something like they kind of drop a map and they say, well, realistically, there isn't anywhere in Los Angeles County that's not within 10 miles of a school. And if you're within 10 miles of a school, you can't possess X. They've done it. They've done this in a ways. It's kind of a conversation we can have. They've done it with sex offenders and child molesters. Well, they'll basically say you can keep registered sex offenders out of your town by just making sure that the buildings they can't live within a certain amount of feet of, they overlap. So there's a lot of ways to get around this. One thing I want to get into before we get on, because I guess Andrew Yang is an interesting character, and I want you to hear this. So on Twitter, he came out with the just standard boilerplate anti-Second Amendment thing. Not anti-Second Amendment, but this is just, you hear this a lot. There's no practical reason for citizens to have assault weapons. We need to treat gun ownership as an awesome privilege and responsibility and regulate accordingly. Guns are more deadly than cars, and we take tests to get driver's licenses now. A user replied and said, this is the main issue stopping me from voting for you. I understand that you're a Democrat and this is a mostly Democratic view, but I urge you to reconsider your position. And this is why I like Andrew Yang. This is a response.
Okay.
Thanks for the thoughtful response. I think reasonable people can come together on common sense approaches. Most Americans agree that there shouldn't be absolutes on either side. And that is such a refreshing take from, even because a lot of people get very emotional when talking about Second Amendment.
Yet he ceded no ground. And I'll tell you this right now, I am so and maybe I am not emotionally prepared, and I completely admit maybe I'm not emotionally prepared to talk about the Second Amendment with Andrew Yang, because if he has a D behind his name and he says, I want common sense gun reform, he has zero credibility. Because every single time, quote, common sense gun reform has been touted about, it has never been common sense, and they never cede any ground. You want to know some common sense gun reform? Okay, let's start actually enforcing the laws that we already have. That's common sense to me, but they don't want to do that. They will only accept like his party, maybe not him. And I would like to think that he is a lot more rational than his party, but his party wants nothing more than complete confiscation of guns like Australia did. And this isn't Alex Jones conspiracy theory stuff. Look at the writings of Kevin De Leon in California. California is the precedent state. Kevin De Leon wants to confiscate all guns. That's it. Point blank. So as long as you've got a D behind your name, you can't come at me with saying, oh, reasonable people can come together and have common sense gun reform. That's just a platitude. And the other thing is registration always leads to confiscation. The only way that a government can confiscate somebody's guns if they know if they know that you have guns because of a list where you had to register it somewhere. Now, if he wanted to say you need a license to have guns, I'm down. Yeah, I'm down. Well, also, and if you have to pass a basic test, like a driving test, to show you basically know how to drive, then I'm totally down. And in fact, I have advocated for a special part of the driver's license, just like on your driver's license, it says if you're an organ donor or not. I think on your driver's license, you should be able to show whether or not you're a gun owner, so you don't have to wait 30 days to purchase a handgun.
But the thing is, though, I mean, and it's a bit of an absurd example, but seriously, think about this. Do you think that people, after they hit the age of 18, should have to undergo some kind of training before they can exercise their First Amendment right fully? Should they have to undergo some kind of training before they can fully exercise their right to assemble freely? Do you have to say, hey, look, bad things can happen when people assemble in public. A lot of violence can happen. We can cite all these mob attacks. So it's important that in order for you to exercise your right you hit this minimum legal standard. Because look, people say with cars all the time, there's no amendment guaranteeing you the right to drive a motor vehicle. There's an amendment with 3 big words, shall not be, 4 words, shall not be infringed, that says you're allowed to own firearms. And look, there's a great discussion. We should always be having discussions on these amendments and our rights and really where they go and where they end. But the bottom line is whenever you compare firearms to anything aside from free speech, look, it's in the Constitution. Like there's a big difference between, hey, Americans should be able to fly commercially and, hey, the amendment guarantees your right to firearm ownership. Those aren't the same thing as apples and oranges.
Okay, that's a very interesting question, Cody. I've never thought about it. Should there be training before you can exercise your First Amendment rights? And to a certain extent, I don't think it should be required. Obviously, there's no First Amendment license, but I think there is a training. And I think that's why we don't judge people the same way before they're 18 as we do after 18. I think just the amalgamation of your public education and your social normalization growing up is what leads you to being a, quote, mature adult. And our society generally believes that happens between the ages of 18 and 21. That's why all of these laws allowing us to start drinking and smoking and driving and so on and so forth happen between the ages of 16 and 21, depending on where you are.
But so why not? But so why can't firearms be treated the same way? Where we just say, hey, by the time you're of legal age to own a firearm, as a culture, we kind of treat firearms with respect, and we understand they're dangerous. So by the time you're of age to own one, you've kind of undergone that training. You shouldn't need a license. It's your right.
Once again, I think that should apply with some basic guns, like long rifles and shotguns.
But what's a long rifle?
Oh, well, there's definitely definitions for long rifles. Basically rifles that need to be held with two hands. They have a certain length of a barrel.
But before Las Vegas, what firearm was used in the single deadliest mass shooting in the country before Las Vegas?
Before the Las Vegas shooting,
yeah,
the most dangerous probably was something common. I assume a shotgun.
No, it was a semi-automatic handgun. It was the Virginia Tech shooting over a decade ago.
Semi-automatic handgun. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that.
So I mean, like you can. I mean, the bottom line is
and this is where I guess maybe I'm moderate. Maybe I'm moderate in the sense that I think, okay, we all have this right and it shall not be infringed. But just like it says, in order to have a well-regulated militia, I'm not suggesting that the interpretation of the word regulation in that case literally means the word legislative regulation. Okay.
Well, no, I mean, let's go down that line. Okay. So, and they mentioned militia specifically. So if they believe that the people should have the right to form militias to defend themselves from tyranny, foreign or domestic, which I believe is kind of the lines, well, guess what? You have to be able to own firearms. Point blank. Boom. Period. There's no way around it. The state can't have your firearm in a locker for you so you can protect yourself from them.
Well, now that we're actually talking about lockers, let's get back to Andrew Yang. I do like how he said before you can purchase it, you have to show that you have a place that you can put it, that is safe. You have to show some kind of receipt for a gun locker with a lock.
Further disenfranchising the poor.
What'd you say?
Further disenfranchising the poor who can maybe afford a firearm but can't afford the firearm with an expensive gun safe.
That's actually a good point. Or he says a trigger lock, which is very inexpensive. But I have heard him, and this is where I'd want to know more from Andrew Yang. So if any of your people are listening, Andrew, or you yourself are listening, we invite you to come on the show to clarify this, because I also have heard in some other radio interviews where he suggested having biometric locks so that only your hand can open up guns. That adds at least a $300 to $500 expense on each gun, but guns are already pretty expensive as well. I would hate to see that disenfranchise the poor. You're right. But
full disclosure, specifically in that Breakfast Club video, he mentioned the state facilitating that. And I believe he implied the state would eat that cost. I believe.
Okay. We'll have to go back and check that. But at the end of the day, I would say this. His approach is more rational and reasonable than the general Democrat approach right now.
Oh, big time. It's not a abolish the Second Amendment at all.
Exactly. And I appreciate very much that he's been willing to approach with a scalpel these different tiers and actually think through it, okay? However, it doesn't seem that he knows a lot about guns or a lot about the controversies that certain gun legislation has already created, because they're not addressed. I like that he has the good gun owner tax credit. I think that actually should be a tax credit open to everybody, almost to encourage solid, good gun ownership and the exercise of one's Second Amendment rights. And here's the only other problem that I have with Andrew Yang sometimes in general is he's not showing what stupid laws he's going to get rid of. And when it comes to gun ownership, there are tons of stupid laws.
Well, I mean, in here, he's proposing, I want to pull it up again so we can just quote it, but he's proposing something in here a federal judge literally just poo-pooed like this week. A ban on high-capacity magazines. Well, it turns out that a judge blocks California's ban on high-capacity magazines over Second Amendment concerns. The judge cited home invasions, including one where a pajama-clad woman took on 3 intruders. Quote, she had no place to carry an extra magazine and no way to reload.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you're a responsible person, the number of bullets you have won't matter. If you're an irresponsible person, the number of magazines you have won't matter. That was shown in the New Zealand shooter video.
I mean,
okay?
how many rounds does a Glock semi-automatic handgun hold? Like I said in the Virginia Tech shooting, I believe he was using magazines that probably held between 10 and maybe 15 rounds of ammunition. I mean, it was way less than the 30 they tried to ban. The thing is, you can reload quick.
And also, at the end of the day, this cool-off period legislation that we have for all kinds of different guns, if my neighbor, who's a gun enthusiast, and he loves going skeet shooting, he loves going target shooting, and so on and so forth, if he has to wait 30 days from the time that he purchases a gun to the time he's allowed to pick it up every single time he wants to buy a gun, that's not at all making us safer, but it's limiting his exercise of the Second Amendment. So if you want to propose some kind of legislation that restricts a little bit of freedom, you better show me a great increase in security. If not, then it's just a leftist gun grab. And I would like to see from Andrew Yang a lot more knowledge of guns coupled with a lot more pro-positive gun owner language and attitude, because at this point from reading this platform, it still to me kind of feels like he's against people that own a gun.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, it does kind of come across, because like I said, I mean, it's early on. He's not even, we're barely in the primary season.
Yeah.
However, as far as people running on the Democratic ticket or fighting for that spot, he's definitely one of the names I like. However, this does seem a little bit like, hey, we need to get 70-something policies up there. Obviously, gun control needs to be one of them. I kind of want to do a tiered system. We'll figure out the facts later. Because like I said, I mean, a federal judge just said you can't ban high-capacity magazines and violate the Second Amendment. That just happened a few weeks ago. I get he wrote this before that, but idea being there's a lot of stuff in here for him that seems uncharacteristically under-researched and unnuanced. Typically, there's a lot more nuance than what he's talking about.
Yeah, and anybody that is into civil rights, anybody that's into African-American incarceration, unfairness, and working against that is going to hate the Tier 3 advanced license requirements. Underneath banning high-capacity magazines, he literally says on his website, to require submission of fingerprints and DNA to the FBI. Registration always leads to confiscation, and registration always leads to incarceration. One of the reasons why so many municipalities didn't want to legalize marijuana for such a long time was because the cops loved it, because you could arrest somebody for drugs, a simple marijuana charge, and then bust them on something bigger that you found while you had them in custody for those 2 or 3 days. I don't want every single gun owner in America. There's 300 million guns in America. I think it's 300 million. Don't quote me on that. We'll look it up. But there are millions of guns in America owned by good citizens who have no reason to be registered in the FBI's database. So there's all of a sudden a list out there that can be exploited or abused by government officials. And submitting to a gun locker inspection, which is right below it, when's that going to be? Yearly? So you're saying that by exercising my Second Amendment right, all of a sudden I have to open up my home to inspections by the police or the FBI or the ATF just in order to secure and maintain an already God-given unalienable right? So is it a God-given unalienable right like the Constitution says, or is it a government-given negative right like Andrew Yang seems to impose?
Reading right from here, from his own words, anyone with a history of violence, domestic abuse, or violent mental illness would be restricted from receiving a license. Now, obviously, you don't want people that are... You say that's fair, but at the same time, let's say someone...
It's a subjective definition.
Yeah, let's say you get in a bar fight, you're convicted with the assault in a bar fight. So then they say, well, you're a convicted violent criminal. You can't own a firearm. We're restricting your access to a God-given right because you were convicted of something. And like I said, sentencing laws, and as far as I know, very few people in this country are 100% on board with the way justice is served every single time.
Yes.
But sometimes more than others. But you can be on one end of an injustice, listed a violent offender, when realistically, you probably don't need to be listed as a violent offender. Boom, Second Amendment, gone. You don't have that right anymore. That's a scary thought, especially, this is what gets me, violent mental illness. Violent mental illness. That's one of those things that, guess what? They can change the definition of that, whatever. They put your name on a list. You're violently mentally ill, can't own guns.
The APA just came out and said that masculinity is toxic and is like one step away of a mental illness in and of itself. So nothing to do with subjective definitions. I completely agree with you. There was there was a California law that was very common sense that was passed, saying that if you had been convicted in prison of having violent kind of mental illnesses, you should not be allowed to have guns. It passed in pretty bipartisan fashion. But then again, it was given to like a task force of 8 people for the entire state to comb through a list of 30,000 inmates that in the past 20 years have been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, already proven cases of domestic violence where they're at risk of shooting their spouse if they actually have a gun. We all agree that those people have forfeited their constitutional rights.
I don't agree fully with that.
Well, not forfeited, but I'm saying that you're right. Forfeit isn't the right.
But I don't think because you're bipolar. Sorry, man, you're bipolar. You don't have the access to your Second Amendment right anymore.
Yeah, no. From what I remember, it was actually a decently drafted law. Whereas, like, you had to have been gotten off of a crime because you basically had to have taken an insanity plea.
That's one thing.
You know, and if you're taking an insanity plea to get out of a crime, well, then you're declaring yourself insane. So that's different. However, when you only have 8 guys enforcing a list of 30,000 people, you can't get through it for hundreds of years. So it's therefore a mute law that's unenforceable. So why'd you pass it in the first place?
Well, what scares me is just the idea of having in this country a list of names.
Yeah, no list.
It's basically like saying, oh, they floated around. Maybe if you're on the no-fly list or if you've been investigated by the FBI, if the government can create a list and say people on this list don't have access to their rights, that's just ripe for abuse. It doesn't matter how it starts, doesn't matter how good intentioned. If they can put your name on a list and say, oh, you know what, we're going to limit your First Amendment right. You can't own guns. You can't assemble because you're on the list. It's just a setup for the government to abuse it. That's all it is.
So kudos to Andrew Yang for saying we also need to augment involvement in the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs Suicide Prevention Hotline. Kudos for him saying we need to fund mindfulness programs in correctional facilities that show how to, help with de-escalation and reduce violent behavior. I want to hear a little bit more from Andrew Yang on this. I have to tell you, he either sounds not very knowledgeable about guns or very knowledgeable about programs, but not knowledgeable about how these programs are rank for abuse. So I know a lot of conservatives that love UBI, but their love for the freedom dividend is not trumped by their fear of his Second Amendment approach. And he's got to get over this Second Amendment approach if he wants those votes. This is Problem Solver Politics.